February 26, 1959. Kholat Syakhl, Northern Ural Mountains, Soviet Union, 4 p.m. A young student, Mikhail Sharavin, trudges through waist-deep snow, breath freezing. He's part of a search party. The temperature is minus 25 degrees Celsius. Wind howls. Then he sees it. A tent, half collapsed, buried in snow. He calls out. Others rush over, hearts pounding with hope. Maybe the hikers are alive, sheltering inside. They pull back the frozen canvas. The tent is empty. Something is terribly wrong. It's slashed open from the inside. Long, jagged cuts run through the fabric, as if hacked from inside. Belongings scattered. Clothes, boots, food, diaries, all left behind. Mikhail sees footprints leading away from the tent, down the slope toward a forest. 9 sets of prints. These aren't prints of properly dressed people. Some are barefoot, some in socks. One shows a single shoe. They stagger and disappear. Mikhail later recalled, the tent was half torn down, covered in snow. It was empty, all belongings and shoes left behind. What drove 9 experienced campers to abandon shelter, without clothing, fleeing into the frozen wilderness? This question haunted the world. The mountain with a dark name, Kholat Syakhl, in Mansi, it means dead mountain. A fitting name for this perplexing mystery. The hikers were students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnical Institute, led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov. They were experienced trekkers undertaking a grade 3 expedition, the highest difficulty level. They knew the mountains and the cold, but something on that mountain, on the night of February 1st or 2nd, 1959, made them slash their way out of their tent. Over the following months, searchers found their bodies scattered across the frozen landscape. Some died of hypothermia. Others suffered catastrophic injuries, fractured skulls, crushed chests, missing eyes, a missing tongue. One victim's skin had an strange orange tint. Traces of radiation were detected on their clothing. The Soviet investigation concluded a compelling natural force. They closed the case, classified the files, and buried the mystery. But the dead do not rest so easily. Tonight, on Dark Evidence, we unravel the full story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. The hikers, the search, the bodies, the theories, and the scientific breakthrough that may finally explain what happened on Dead Mountain. To understand this mystery, you must first know the people who lived it, the 10 who set out. They were young, full of life, eager for adventure. Their names were Igor Dyatlov, 23, group leader, a radio engineering student, intelligent, responsible, experienced. The mountain pass where they died now bears his name. Yuri Doroshenko, 21, energetic, enthusiastic. He would be one of the first bodies found. Ludmila Dubanina, 20, the youngest of the group. Bright, ambitious. Her injuries would be among the most horrific. Georgy Krivonishenko, 23, quiet, thoughtful. He and Doroshenko would be found together near a cedar tree. Alexander Kolovatov, 24, studious, serious. His body would be found last, in the ravine. Zenaida Kolmogorova, 22, Igor Dyatlov's close friend. She was found first, frozen in the snow. Rustim Slobodin, 23, athletic, strong. He had a small crack in his skull, but died of hypothermia. Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignolos, 23. His skull was fractured so severely that pieces of bone were found in his brain. Semyon Zolotaryov, 38, the oldest, a war veteran and experienced sports instructor. His chest was crushed. Yuri Yudin, 21, the 10th member. He would be the only survivor, turning back before reaching Dead Mountain. Yudin recalled, "I was with them for 5 days. We laughed, ate, dreamed together of reaching the summit. Then my old knee injury flared up. Igor told me to go back. I fought him, but he insisted. We'll see you in Vitsai in 2 weeks, he said. Save some hot tea for us." That was the last time I saw any of them alive. For 60 years, I have asked myself, why me? Why was I the one who lived? Yudin died in 2013, never knowing what happened. The expedition begins. On January 25th, the group arrived by train at Iverdel, a small town at the edge of civilization. From there, they took a truck to Vitsai, the last inhabited outpost before the wilderness. On January 27th, they began their trek toward Gora Otorten, a mountain 10 kilometers north of where they would eventually die. The weather was brutal. Deep snow, bitter cold, howling winds. But these were experienced hikers. They kept detailed diaries and took photographs with the cameras they carried. Their entries speak of camaraderie, of shared hardship, of the beauty of the frozen landscape. On January 28th, Yuri Yudin turned back. The remaining 9 pressed on. On January 31st, they reached the edge of the highland area and cached some of their food and equipment in a wooded valley. They were thinking ahead. They were planning to come back. The next day, February 1st, they began their final approach. The last camp. That afternoon, the weather worsened. A snowstorm blew in, reducing visibility. The group, according to their planned route, should have crossed the pass and made camp on the other side. But in the whiteout conditions, they lost their way. They drifted west toward the slope of Kholat Syakhl, known ominously as Dead Mountain. When they realized their mistake, they faced a choice: backtrack to a forested area for shelter from the wind, or pitch their tent on the open slope and continue in the morning. Igor Dyatlov made the call. They would camp there. Yuri Yudin speculated Dyatlov didn't want to lose altitude or wanted to practice camping on the mountain slope. It was a decision that would cost 9 lives. They pitched their large tent, secured it to the slope. They set up their stove, prepared a meal, and documented their evening in their diaries. The last entry from Igor Dyatlov's notebook is mundane. It's cold. The wind is strong. We're going to sleep now. They had no idea they would never wake up. Next time on Dark Evidence. In part 2, we follow the search party's grim discovery. The tent slashed from inside, the footprints leading nowhere, the first bodies found near the cedar tree, and the horrifying injuries that would baffle investigators for decades. Dark Evidence, where the evidence tells the story, but the heart remembers. Subscribe now. The Search, a terrible force of nature. February 20th, 1959, 12 days overdue. When the Dyatlov group failed to return by their expected date, no one immediately panicked. Delays were common in winter expeditions. But as days passed without word, families grew anxious. On February 20th, the first rescue groups were dispatched, volunteers, students and teachers from the institute. Soon, the military became involved. Planes and helicopters joined the search. The area was vast, the terrain unforgiving. On February 26th, Mikhail Sherovin and his team made their way up Kholat Syakhl. What they found would haunt them forever. Mikhail Sherovin, in a later interview, recalled a chilling moment. He said, "Best not drink to their health, but to their eternal peace." Then, the tent. It was almost completely buried, only a small portion visible above the snow. When they excavated it, they found the entrance facing downhill, unusual for a tent. The tent was found slashed open from the inside, with long, clean cuts. Personal belongings like warm clothes, boots, and food were strewn everywhere, all left behind. A search party followed 9 sets of footprints leading downhill towards a forest. Some were barefoot, others in socks or a single shoe. The prints vanished after 500 meters, erased by wind and snow. An investigative report confirmed the tent was cut from inside. Near a large cedar tree with broken lower branches, searchers made a grim discovery. The bodies of Georgy Krivnishenko and Yuri Doroshenko lay in the snow. They were dressed only in underwear, having died of hypothermia. Their hands were burned, as if trying to build a fire in minus 25-degree cold. Why would they strip in such extreme cold? Why were they so far from the tent? And why did they run? Over the next days, 3 more bodies were found. Igor Dyatlov, 300 meters from the tent, lay as if trying to return to camp. Zinaida Kolmogorova was found 630 meters away, also a victim of hypothermia. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of history's most chilling, unsolved mysteries. Rustem Slobodin was found 480 meters from the tent, dead from hypothermia. Autopsy revealed a 6-centimeter skull crack, suggesting violence. His injuries' cause remained a mystery, not fatal, but deeply unsettling. What truly happened on that desolate slope? For hikers were still missing. As spring arrived, searchers returned. An indigenous Mansi hunter made a grim discovery. At the bottom of a deep ravine, a crude shelter of branches and clothing was found. Inside lay the remaining 4: Lyudmila Dubanina, Semyon Zolotaryev, Alexander Kolivatov, and Nikolai Thibobrina-Lus had died horrifically. Nikolai suffered a massive skull fracture. Semyon and Lyudmila had crushed chests, injuries likened to a car crash. Lyudmila was missing her tongue, and both she and Semyon were missing their eyes. Alexander's neck was twisted. The soft tissue damage was inexplicable. No animals had disturbed the bodies, protected in a snow den. The missing eyes and tongue suggested violence, but what kind? Autopsies by Soviet forensic experts raised more questions than answers. The hypothermia victims had only minor abrasions, but 4 in the ravine suffered catastrophic trauma. Dubanina and Zolotaryev's chest injuries were puzzling. Ribs crushed by immense pressure, yet no external bruising. This suggested blunt force trauma from something massive and smooth, perhaps a snow slab or something else entirely. The missing eyes and tongue remained unexplained. Scavengers were unlikely, and decomposition couldn't remove a tongue entirely. Then there was the radiation. An unusual orange tint on some bodies, and traces of radioactive contamination on clothing. The levels weren't lethal, but significant enough to raise suspicion. In the context of the Cold War, with the Soviet Union engaged in a nuclear arms race, this discovery fueled dark theories. Had the hikers stumbled upon a secret weapons test? Had they been exposed to radiation from a military experiment? The Soviet government classified the investigation and declared the case closed. The official conclusion, announced in May 1959, stated that the hikers had died from a compelling natural force. What that force was, they did not explain. The files were sealed. The families were given few answers, and the mystery of Dead Mountain entered the realm of legend. The survivors' silence. The families of the victims received little information. They were told not to speak publicly. The Soviet state had spoken. The case was closed. Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor who turned back, spent the rest of his life searching for answers. He corresponded with investigators, read the classified files when they were later released, and followed every theory. He said, "I have thought about this every day for 50 years. What happened on that mountain? What made my friends run? What killed them? I have no answers, only questions. He died in 2013 at the age of 76, taking those questions to his grave. Next time on Dark Evidence. In Part 3, we examine the theories, from Yeti attacks to military tests, from infrasound to katabatic winds. For 6 decades, investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths have proposed dozens of explanations for what happened on Dead Mountain. We'll examine the evidence for each. Dark Evidence, where the evidence tells the story, but the heart remembers. Subscribe now. The theories: conspiracy, cover-up, or coincidence. The vacuum of truth. When the Soviet Union closed the Dyatlov investigation in 1959, they created a vacuum. And nature, as they say, abhors a vacuum. Into that void rushed theories of every kind, some plausible, some bizarre, some downright fantastical. By 2019, when Russian authorities reopened the case, they identified at least 75 different theories. Andrei Kurakov, the prosecutor who led the new investigation, stated that many theories alleged the incident was engineered by authorities. He quickly added that 15 theories, blaming law enforcement, were proven ungrounded, but the conspiracy theories persist. Let's examine the major ones. Theory 1. Avalanche. The most obvious explanation, and the one that would eventually gain scientific support, is an avalanche. But the theory faced immediate objections. The slope where the tent was pitched was not steep enough for an avalanche. The incline was only about 22 to 23 degrees, far below the typical 30-degree threshold for avalanche terrain. There were no signs of avalanche debris at the site. And if an avalanche had occurred, why was there a gap of several hours between the hikers cutting the snow to pitch their tent and the supposed avalanche? Proponents of the avalanche theory pointed to the victims' injuries, crushed chests, and fractured skulls. These were consistent with blunt force trauma from a heavy object, like a large mass of snow. Hikers digging into the slope to pitch their tent could have destabilized the snowpack, leading to a delayed avalanche. But the lack of evidence at the scene remained a problem for this theory. An avalanche powerful enough would have left debris and disturbed snow patterns. Yet when the search party arrived, they found none of these indications. Theory 2. Military weapons test. Perhaps the most persistent theory is that the hikers stumbled upon a secret military test. The Cold War was at its height. The Soviet military conducted weapons experiments in remote areas. Proponents point to radiation found on the victims' clothing, and some bodies had an orange tint to their skin. The chest injuries, they argue, could have been caused by a shockwave from an explosion. Missing eyes and tongue could be explained by scavengers, or perhaps by the vacuum effects of a blast. In the 1990s, after the Soviet Union collapsed, classified documents were released. They revealed military activity in the region around the time of the incident, but no direct link to the deaths. Yuri Yudin, the survivor, believed this theory until his death. He insisted, "My friends were killed by weapons." The government knows this. They have always known. However, investigators who reopened the case in 2019 specifically ruled out secret activities of law enforcement agencies as a cause. Theory 3. Indigenous Mansi attack. The Mansi people are the indigenous inhabitants of the northern Urals. They have lived in the region for centuries, hunting and reindeer herding. Some early theories suggested they might have attacked the hikers, perhaps for trespassing on sacred land. But this theory was quickly dismissed. The Mansi were peaceful people with good relations with outsiders. There was no evidence of conflict at the site. Injuries were not consistent with a human attack. The crushed chests and fractured skulls were not consistent with a human attack. No weapon caused such trauma. Soviet authorities investigated this theory thoroughly and found no basis for it. Theory 4. Yeti. Yes, the mythical creature makes an appearance in Dyatlov lore. Some propose the hikers were attacked by an alpine giant, an abominable snowman, a Yeti. The theory is absurd on its face, but it gained traction in certain circles. Proponents pointed to missing eyes and tongue, perhaps eaten by a creature. They noted the crushed chests, perhaps caused by a powerful blow from a massive beast. But no evidence of Yeti has ever been found in the Urals. The theory remains firmly in the realm of fantasy. Theory 5. Infrasound. A more scientific theory involves low-frequency sound waves, generated by wind passing over mountain ridges, creating katabatic wind. Infrasound can cause panic, disorientation, and a feeling of dread. Hikers, exposed to infrasound while sleeping, may have panicked and fled their tent. They cut their way out and ran without proper clothing, not thinking clearly. It explains why they didn't return. They were disoriented. But it does not explain the physical injuries, particularly crushed chests and fractured skulls. Theory 6. Staged experiment. A darker theory proposes the incident was a staged experiment by Soviet authorities. Perhaps a test of human reaction in extreme conditions, or a cover for something else entirely. This theory, like many, suffers from a lack of evidence. It requires believing the Soviet government would kill 9 citizens, including war hero Semyon Zolotoyev, for an unknown purpose, and that families would remain silent. Investigators have found no support for this theory. Theory 7. Animals and panic. Another theory suggests hikers were frightened by a large animal, fleeing their tent in panic. The animal could have then attacked them, causing injuries. But animal attacks leave distinctive marks: claw marks, bite marks, defensive wounds. The victims had none of these, and no animal tracks were found. Theory 8. The Kama-Daybon comparison. Researchers compared Dyatlov to the 1993 Kama-Daybon incident, another mysterious mass death of hikers in Siberia. 7 of 8 died under similarly mysterious circumstances. Theories for that incident include toxic algae, contaminated water, or unknown environmental factors. Could something similar have happened at Dyatlov Pass? Possibly, but without evidence, it remains speculation. The prosecutor's conclusion? In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the investigation to put theories to rest. Andrei Kuryakov, the prosecutor, was clear: all fantastic theories have been dropped. We proved 15 theories explaining deaths by secret law enforcement activities are ungrounded. The most probable explanation, he said, was a snow avalanche. But proving an avalanche required overcoming decades of objections that would take scientists, advanced technology, and a little help from Hollywood. Next time on Dark Evidence. In Part 4, we examine the scientific breakthrough. 2 Swiss researchers, a computer simulation from Disney's Frozen and 1970s car crash data. The result, a compelling explanation for what happened on Dead Mountain. Dark Evidence, where the evidence tells the story, but the heart remembers. Subscribe now. The Dyatlov mystery has baffled investigators for decades. Could an avalanche truly explain the tragic events? In 2019, 2 Swiss scientists, Alexander Pazrin and Johann Gaum, formed an unlikely partnership to investigate. Pazrin, a geotechnical engineer, and Gaum, an avalanche expert, aimed to apply science to this enduring enigma. A key objection to the avalanche theory was the slope itself. The campsite incline was only 22 to 23 degrees. This is significantly less than the 30-degree threshold typically required for avalanches to occur. However, detailed topographical data revealed a crucial insight. The terrain of Kholat Syakhl played a trick on the eye. While the immediate campsite appeared gentle, the slope directly above it was actually closer to 30 degrees. Wind and snow had smoothed the surface, creating an optical illusion, making the danger less apparent. As Pozrin explained, the local topography truly played a trick on them, concealing the true risk. The delay problem. The second objection was the time gap. The hikers had cut into the slope to pitch their tent in the late afternoon. If they had destabilized the snowpack, why didn't the avalanche occur immediately? Why several hours later? Pozrin had previously studied how earthquakes can trigger avalanches with delays ranging from minutes to hours. The mechanism was similar: a disturbance that weakens the snowpack, followed by a slow accumulation of stress until failure occurs. In the case of Dyatlov Pass, the key factor was wind. Meteorological data from St. Petersburg's Voikov Main Geophysical Observatory showed that nearly 5 feet of snow would have covered the area that night, with winds blowing up to 25 miles per hour. These were katabatic winds, heavy clumps of frigid air that brought large amounts of snow from higher up down toward the campsite. The wind steadily increased the load on an already precarious slope. Over the course of several hours, the weight built up until the snowpack finally gave way. The Disney connection. Now Gaum and Pozrin needed to simulate what happened next. They needed to model how a slab of snow would move down the slope and what forces it would exert on the people below. For this, Gaum turned to an unexpected source: Disney. A few years earlier, Gaum had been struck by how realistic snow looked in the 2013 Disney film Frozen. He contacted the animators, flew to Hollywood, and asked how they had done it. The animators shared their code with him, sophisticated algorithms that modeled the behavior of snow under various conditions. Gaum adapted this code for his avalanche simulations. The result was a computer model that could predict, with remarkable precision, how a slab avalanche would behave on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. The cadaver data. The simulation showed that a slab of snow about 5 meters wide, roughly the size of an SUV, could have broken loose and slid down the slope. It would have struck the tent with significant force, but how much force? And what injuries would that force cause? To answer this, the researchers needed data on how much pressure the human body can withstand. They found it in an unlikely place: 1970s car crash tests conducted by General Motors. In the 70s, GM took 100 cadavers and broke their ribs, hitting them with different weights at different velocities, Pozrin explained. The purpose was to calibrate seatbelt safety standards. The data was meticulously recorded and eventually published. Some of the cadavers had been braced with rigid supports, others had not. This turned out to be serendipitous for the researchers. On the slope of Kholat Syakhl, the hikers had placed their bedding on top of their skis, creating an unusually rigid sleeping surface. The GM data allowed Gaum and Pozrin to calibrate their impact models with remarkable precision. The simulation results. When they ran the simulation, the results were striking. A slab of icy snow, about 5 meters long, moving at speed, could indeed break ribs and fracture skulls. Exactly the injuries found on Dubinina, Zolotaryov, and Thibubrin. In 1959, 9 hikers perished mysteriously in the Ural Mountains. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains unsolved. Scientists Gaum and Pozrin proposed a groundbreaking theory: a rare snow slab avalanche. Their simulations suggested severe injuries, yet not instantly fatal, leaving hikers conscious and terrified. They likely cut their way out, fleeing downhill into the dark, unforgiving night. Fresh snowfall and howling winds quickly buried the slab, erasing all traces for early searchers. Their 2021 paper confirmed the plausibility of this rare snow slab instability. However, it didn't explain all controversial elements, like the hikers' behavior post-ent. In January 2022, an expedition found 2 fresh slab avalanches at Kholat Syakhl. These occurred under conditions remarkably similar to 1959, validating the theory. Expert Jordi Hendricks praised the work, highlighting new science shedding light on historic puzzles. The skeptics? Not everyone was convinced. Carl Birkeland, director of the U.S. Forest Service's National Avalanche Center, told the New York Times, "We believe that the avalanche hypothesis cannot be completely ruled out, but that it is not the most likely scenario." For him, the angle of the slope remained a concern. While it may be remotely possible, we would suggest that it would be highly improbable. Jim McElwain, a geohazards expert at Durham University in England, was more open to the theory but still had questions. "It's unlikely, but that doesn't stop it being the best explanation. I don't know what else it could be." He also raised a behavioral question. If you're in that type of harsh environment, it's suicide to leave shelter without your clothes on. For people to do that, they must have been terrified by something. I can't understand why else they would have behaved in that way, unless they were trying to flee from someone who's been tracking them. The missing pieces. Even if the avalanche theory explains the injuries, it does not explain everything. Why did some hikers run barefoot while others wore socks? Why did Krivonishenko and Doroshenko strip down to their underwear near the cedar tree? Why did the 4 in the ravine seek shelter in a snow den rather than returning to the tent? Why were Dubinina's eyes and tongue missing? The researchers have partial answers. The hypothermia victims may have experienced paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon where freezing people feel burning hot and remove clothing. The missing body parts could be explained by scavengers, or by decomposition in the running water of the stream. But these are speculations, not certainties. The simulation proves what could have happened, not what did happen. Pazarin himself is careful not to overstate his case. "We do not claim that now we have a final explanation of what happened," he said. "But we added plausibility to the avalanche theory." Next time on Dark Evidence. In Part 5, we examine the legacy. The families who never got answers. The mountain that became a memorial. The hikers who became legends. And the question that remains. After 60 years of investigation, can we finally say we know what happened on Dead Mountain? Dark Evidence. Where the evidence tells the story, but the heart remembers. Subscribe now. The legacy, they had no chance. In July 2020, Russian authorities reopened the investigation into the Dyatlov Pass incident. Andrei Karyakov, deputy head of the regional prosecutor's office, concluded an avalanche caused the deaths. He spoke of a heroic struggle, stating there was no panic, but they had no chance to save themselves. 9 young people, full of life, battled forces beyond their control. They fought and lost, but not quietly. The mountain remembers. Today, the pass bears Igor Dyatlov's name. A memorial stands near the campsite. Visitors leave photographs, flowers, and notes. People come from around the world, drawn by the mystery and tragedy. The site is remote, yet many make the journey. They want to stand where the hikers stood, to feel what they felt, and pay their respects. In 2022, an expedition to the site recorded 2 new slab avalanches on the same slope, proof that the mountain is indeed avalanche-prone. The conditions were similar to those on February 1st, 1959. The mountain had not forgotten. For the families of the victims, these new findings brought a measure of closure. Not complete closure, but at least an explanation. The Dubinina family accepted the avalanche theory. They had lived for decades with the horror of Ludmila's injuries. The Zolotaryov family did the same. They had waited 60 years for answers. Now, at last, they had something to hold on to. The Krivonashenko family found peace, knowing their son had not suffered alone. His friend Doroshenko was with him at the end. They had faced the cold together. And the Dyatlov family, Igor's younger brother, grew old waiting for answers. He passed away in 2015, 5 years before the official conclusion. He never knew what happened. Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor who turned back, spent his life searching for answers. He died in 2013 at 76. In one of his last interviews, he was asked if the mystery would ever be solved. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I hope so, for their sake, for my sake, for the sake of everyone who has ever looked at that mountain and wondered." He paused, then added, "But even if we never know exactly what happened, I know one thing. They were my friends. They were good people. They loved life, and they died doing what they loved. That is enough." The Dyatlov Pass incident has become more than a mystery. It is a cautionary tale about the power of nature, the limits of human endurance, and the human need for answers in the face of inexplicable tragedy. It has inspired books, documentaries, films, and countless internet forums. It has been called the greatest unsolved mystery of the 20th century. It has spawned theories ranging from the plausible to the absurd. But beneath all the speculation, there is a simple human truth. 9 people died on that mountain. They were young. They were loved. They are missed. Their names are Igor Dyatlov, Yuri Doroshenko, Lyudmila Dubinina, Georgy Krivonashenko, Alexander Kolovetov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin, Nikolai Thibobrignolas, and Semyon Zolotaryov. They should not be forgotten. On February 1st, 1959, 9 hikers pitched their tent on the slope of Kholat Syakhl. They ate their dinner, wrote in their diaries, and went to sleep. Sometime in the night, a slab of snow broke loose. It crashed onto their tent with the force of an SUV. Some were injured, chests crushed, skulls fractured. All were terrified. They cut their way out and fled into the frozen darkness. They ran toward the forest, leaving behind their warmth, their shelter, their chance of survival. Some made it to the cedar tree. Others fell along the way. The strongest built a snow den, but they could not escape the cold. One by one, they succumbed. First the injured, then the exhausted, then the last holdouts. By morning, all 9 were dead. The wind blew, the snow fell. The mountain kept its secret for 60 years. Now, science has given us an answer. It may not satisfy everyone. It may not explain every detail, but it is the best explanation we have, and it honors the truth that the hikers themselves knew in their final moments. Sometimes nature is simply too powerful, too relentless, too unforgiving. Sometimes there are no monsters, no conspiracies, no mysteries. Sometimes there is just the cold. If you have watched this series to the end, you have traveled through one of the most haunting mysteries. You have seen the evidence, weighed the theories, and followed the science. And now, you must decide for yourself, what happened on Dead Mountain? This is what dark evidence is about. Not easy answers, not comforting conclusions, just the facts, the stories, and the questions that remain. If you believe the truth matters, subscribe, hit the bell, share this video. Help us keep these stories alive. Dark evidence, where the evidence tells the story, but the heart remembers. Subscribe now